contact us at info@wrmi.net. Visit us on the web at www.wrmi.net. Or listen to us on your mobile phone by calling 1 for the United States, 712-432-8868.
Today we conclude our autumn time tales of Edgar Allan Poe's short stories. The oval portrait was mentioned in our first introduction of this series, namely A Masque of the Red Death. I mentioned that very early Gothic novel writer, that is, in the late 1700s, Anne Radcliffe, was immensely popular. She wrote frightening and terrifying descriptions that in and of themselves brought terror to her readers. You will note that credit is given to her talent in the early paragraphs of the oval portrait, which was written in 1842. Here the unnamed narrator, often used by Poe, is enchanted by an extremely lifelike portrait of a young woman that is found in an abandoned castle. He finds out that this is a picture of a young wife of an artist. Only through the reading of an accompanying book of this artist's paintings does the narrator discover the story within this story. The conclusion of this tale presents us with the problem of art and reality. In our age of virtual reality and augmented reality made possible through computing, it serves the same purpose of helping us find a balance between the humanly created and creation itself. So now, let us turn the lights down low, and even light a candle in that darkened room. Turn off any audio or video distractions so that we may be embraced by the atmosphere evoked by the words of Edgar Allan Poe. The chateau into which my valet had ventured to make forcible entrance, rather than permit me in my desperately wounded condition to pass a night in the open air, was one of those piles of commingled gloom and grandeur which have so long found among the Apennines, not less in fact than in the fancy of Mrs. Radcliffe. To all appearance, it had been temporarily and very lately abandoned. We established ourselves in one of the smallest and least sumptuously furnished apartments. It lay in a remote turret of the building. Its decorations were rich, yet tattered and antique. Its walls were hung with tapestry and bedecked with manifold and multiform armorial trophies, together with an unusually great number of spirited modern paintings in frames of rich golden arabesque. These paintings, which depended from the walls not only in their main surfaces, but in very many nooks which the bizarre architecture and chateau rendered necessary. In these paintings my incipient delirium, perhaps, had caused me to take deep interest, so that I bade Pedro to close the heavy shutters of the room, since it was already night, to light the tongues of the tall candelabrum which stood by the head of my bed, and to throw open far and wide the fringed curtains of black velvet which enveloped the bed itself. I wished all this done, that I might resign myself, if not to sleep, at least alternately to contemplation of these pictures, and the perusal of a small volume which had been found upon the pillow, and which purported to criticize and describe them. Long, long I read, and devotedly I gazed. Rapidly and gloriously the hours flew by, and the deep midnight came. The position of the candelabrum displeased me, and outreaching my hand with difficulty, rather than disturb my slumbering valet, I placed it so as to throw its rays more fully upon the book. But the action produced an effect altogether unanticipated. The rays of the numerous candles, for there were many, now fell within a niche of the room which had hitherto been thrown into deep shade by one of the bedposts. I thus saw in vivid light a picture all unnoticed before. It was the portrait of a young girl just ripening into womanhood. I glanced at the painting hurriedly and then closed my eyes. Why I did this was not at first apparent even to my own perception, but while my lids remained thus shut, I ran over in my mind my reason for so shutting them. It was an impulsive movement to gain time for thought, to make sure that my vision had not deceived me, to calm and subdue my fancy for a more sober and more certain gaze. In a very few moments, I looked again fixedly at the painting. That I now saw aright, I could not and would not doubt, for the first flashing of the candles upon that canvas had seemed to dissipate the dreamy stupor which was stealing over my senses, and to startle me at once into waking life. The portrait, I have already said, was that of a young girl. It was a miracle, and done in what is technically termed a vignette manner, much in the style of my favorite heads of Sully. The arms, the bosom, and even the ends of the radiant hair melted imperceptibly into the vague yet deep shadow which formed the background of the whole. The frame was oval, richly gilded and filigreed in Moresque. As a thing of art, nothing could be more admirable than the painting itself, but it could have been neither the execution of the work, nor the immortal beauty of the countenance which had so suddenly and so vehemently moved me. Least of all, could it have been that my fancy, shaken from its half-slumber, had mistaken the head for that of a living person? I saw at once that the peculiarities of the design of the vignetting and the frame must have instantly dispelled such idea, must have prevented even its momentary entertainment. Thinking earnestly upon these points, I remained, for an hour perhaps, half sitting, half reclining, with my vision riveted upon the portrait. At length, satisfied with the true secret of its effect, I fell back within the bed. I had found the spell of the picture in an absolute likeliness of expression, which, at first startling, finally confounded, subdued, and appalled me. With deep and reverent awe, I replaced the candelabrum in its firm position, the cause of my deep agitation being thus shut from my view. I sought eagerly the volume which discussed the painting and their histories. Turning to the number which designated the oval portrait, I there read the vague and quaint words which follow. She was a maiden of rarest beauty, and not more lovely than full of glee. And evil was the hour when she saw and loved and wedded the painter. He, passionate, studious, austere, and having already a bride in his art. She a maiden of rarest beauty, and not more lovely than full of glee, all light and smiles, and frolicsome as the young fawn, loving and cherishing all things, hating only the art which was her rival, dreading only the palette and brushes and other untoward instruments which deprived her of the countenance of her lover. It was thus a terrible thing for this lady to hear the painter speak of his desire to portray even his young bride, but she was humble and obedient, and sat meekly for many weeks in the dark, high turret chamber, where the light dripped upon the pale canvas only from overhead. But he, the painter, took glory in his work, which went on from hour to hour, and from day to day, and he was a passionate and wild and moody man who became lost in reveries, so that he would not see that the light which fell so ghastly in that lone turret withered the health and the spirits of his bride, who pined visibly to all but him. Yet she smiled on, and still on, uncomplainingly, because she saw that the painter, who had high renown, took a fervid and burning pleasure in his task, and wrought day and night to depict her who so loved him, yet who grew daily more dispirited and weak. And in sooth, some who beheld the portrait spoke of his resemblance in low words, as of a mighty marvel, and a proof not less of the power of the painter than of his deep love for her whom he depicted so surpassingly well. But at length, as the labor drew nearer to his conclusion, there were admitted none into the turret, for the painter had grown wild with ardor for his work, and turned his eyes from the canvas rarely, even to regard the countenance of his wife. And he would not see that the tints which he spread upon the canvas were drawn from the cheeks of her that sat beside him. And when many weeks had passed, and but little remained to do, save one brush upon the mouth and one tint upon the eye, the spirit of the lady again flickered up as the flame within the socket of the lamp, and then the brush was given, and then the tint was placed, and for one moment the painter stood entranced before the work which he had wrought. But in the next, while he had gazed, he grew tremulous and very pallid and aghast, and crying with a loud voice, "This is indeed life itself!" turned suddenly to regard his beloved. She was dead. As an added bonus to this, the last of our autumn time tales of Poe, you will have noticed that the oval portrait is one of the shortest of Poe's stories. Thus, I wish to conclude with something that actually is truly befitting of this season of the year. Of course, I'm referring to the Halloween season. This poem was written in 1847, and it was shortly after the death of Poe's wife, Virginia. It is Ulalume. The skies, they were ashen and sober. The leaves, they were crisped and sere. The leaves, they were withering and sere. It was night in the lonesome October of my most immemorial year. It was hard by the dim lake of Auber, in the misty mid-region of Weir. It was down by the dank tarn of Auber, in the ghoul-haunted woodland of Weir. Here once, through an alley titanic, of cypress I wend with my soul, a cypress with Psyche, my soul. These were days when my heart was volcanic, as the scoriac rivers that roll, as the lavas that restlessly roll, the sulphurous currents down Yannick, in the ultimate climbs of the pole, that groan as they roll down Mount Yannick, in the realms of the boreal pole. Our talk had been serious and sober, but our thoughts, they were palsied and sere. Our memories were treacherous and sere, for we knew not the month was October, and we marked not the night of the year, night of all nights in the year. We noted not the dim lake of Auber, though once we had journeyed down here. We remembered not the dank tarn of Auber, nor the ghoul-haunted woodland of Weir. And now, as the night was senescent, and the star dials pointed to morn, as the star dials hinted of morn. At the end of our path a crescent, and nebulous luster was born, out of which a miraculous crescent arose with a duplicate horn, Astarte's bediamond crescent, distinct with its duplicate horn. And I said, she is warmer than Diane. She rolls through an ether of sighs. She revels in a region of sighs. She has seen that the tears are not dry on these cheeks where the worm never dies, and has come past the stars of the lion to point us the path to the skies, to the Lethean peace of the skies. Come up in despite of the lion to shine on us with her bright eyes. Come up to the lair of the lion with love in her luminous eyes. But Psyche, uplifting her finger, said, sadly, this star I mistrust, her pallor I strangely mistrust. Ah, hasten, let us not linger. Ah, fly, let us fly, for we must. In terror she spoke, letting sink her wings till they trailed in the dust. In agony sobbed, letting her sink plumes till they trailed in the dust, till they sorrowfully trailed in the dust. I replied, this is nothing but dreaming. Let us on by this tremulous light. Let us bathe in this crystalline light. Its Sibyllic splendor is beaming with hope and in beauty tonight. See, it flickers up the sky through the night. Ah, we safely may trust to its gleaming, and be sure it will lead us aright. We surely may trust to a gleaming that cannot but guide us aright, since it flickers up to heaven through the night. Thus I pacified Psyche and kissed her, and tempted her out of her gloom, and conquered her scruples and gloom, and we passed to the end of the vista, but were stopped by the door of a tomb, by the door of a legended tomb. And I said, what is written, sweet sister, on the door of this legended tomb? She replied, Ulalume, Ulalume, 'tis the vault as I lost, Ulalume. In my heart it grew silver, as the leaves that were crisped and sere, as the leaves that were withering and sere. And I cried, it was surely October, on this very night of last year, that I journeyed down here, that I brought a dread burden down here, on this night of all nights in the year. Ah, what demon hath tempted me here? Well, I know now this dim lake of Auber, this misty mid-region of Weir. Well, I know now this dank tarn of Auber, this ghoul-haunted woodland of Weir. Said we then, the two then, ah, can it have been that the woodlandish ghouls, the pitiful and merciful ghouls, bar up our way and to ban it from the secret that lies in these wolds, from the thing that lies hidden in these wolds, have drawn up the specter of a planet from the limbo of lunary souls, this sinfully scintillate planet, from the hell of the planetary souls. Well, I must admit that I am singularly unqualified to give an authoritative analysis and summary of this poem, Ulalume. As I stated earlier, it was written shortly after the death of Poe's wife, who had long suffered from what appears to be tuberculosis. It would also appear that this disease was quite prevalent at this time before modern medicine. He seemed to have been afflicted with it as well. Is it any wonder that he is often quoted as saying, and all I loved alone? For he seems to have survived them all, and yet he still died young. Should you read his poems, this grief, this sense of loss, even depression, is often the setting. Thus, it is this setting in Ulalume as well. However, the Raven, Annabel Lee, still offer this same kind of sentiment. In Ulalume, Poe is having a conversation within himself. His soul, his psyche, his physical being are all trying to deal with the writer's despair. Poe's title also informs us that he loves to play with the sound of words. Ulalume is not a usual name, but it forms a short, long sound that sounds mournful. The stem loom seems to be connected to light, as in illuminate, but is not fully there. It's just a speck of the longer word. It also is similar to the word loon, as in the word lunar, the moon, of which is associated with the goddess Diana. Note that he removes the last A in Diana and uses Dion to rhyme with dry on later in the verse. The goddess Astarte is also in the poem. She has a crown like a crescent moon and is the goddess of love and fertility. Odie says she is warmer than Dion. Astrology also plays a large part in this poem too. The astrological sign Leo is in the sky, and it seems to point the way to Lethe, that is, a river, supposedly in Hades, where you drank from it in order to forget the past. Note that earlier in the poem it was in his most immemorial year, that is, it is beyond the reach of memory. Somehow the author, against the warning of his own internal guides, is deceived into hope through the deception of this Venus-type heavenly vision of Astarte, only to continue as if in a trance or a dream through this dreary place to find himself facing the tomb of his deceased love that he had buried a year ago. This frustration increases with his greater consciousness of reality as he seems to awaken from a dream. He's left not with hope, but remains in despair. Yes, it's a sad poem. If you read Poe's poems, you'll find this type of confusion earlier. In 1827 he wrote, "Is all that we see or sing but a dream within a dream?" Or in Israfel in 1831, now Israfel is a heavenly musical angel. "If I could dwell where Israfel hath dwelt, and he where I, he might not sing so wildly well a mortal melody." And then in 1834 he has "To One in Paradise, all my days are trances, and all my nightly dreams are where thy gray eye glances, and where thy footstep gleams, in what ethereal dances, by what eternal streams." Yes, indeed, Edgar Allan Poe is a complicated character, but his influence has inspired many authors afterwards. One such author is H.P. Lovecraft. I can recall driving one evening listening to Lovecraft's short story, The Haunter of the Dark, on a cassette tape that I borrowed from the library, just to keep me company during a long drive home from school. He, like Poe, was able to write a setting and plot that would make your hair stand on end. So check this story and find some of the influences of Poe therein. Thank you for listening to this series of tales by Edgar Allan Poe that was suitable for this